So today's workshop is actually very exciting because we are going to talk about strategic communications and ways to use research findings to advance your advocacy and your campaigning and the work you are trying to carry out. So before the workshop, we have asked all of you to look back at your research goals and targets that you had identified at the very beginning of the process during the design of the research. And this is really where we want to start the conversation from. Tom, I'm going to pass it over to you right away. And so Tom is going to talk us through the research goals and targets. And then we will have a session specifically on strategic communication. But first, we'll start with Tom. And I don't know, Tom, if there's any way we can make it a bit shorter. I know it's already tight, but yeah, I'll hand it over to you.
Yes, thank you, Francesca. Hi, everyone. So good to see you all. And for those who will listen to this recording later, and I'm just put the link in a chat box, and that will lead you to the presentation that Francesca just shared. As Francesca communicated with you all by email at the very beginning of this project, right? Each of you had identified your research goals and objectives, anything that shape your process, right? And I know there's a lot of changes that happening throughout the years. We wanted to just check in with you to see if there are, any changes that happen to your research goal, right? Maybe now that you see what findings of your research look like, maybe initial findings. I don't know where you are at right now, but the questions would be, have that research finding informed or, inspire you to make some change adjustment to your research goal and objectives, right? We just want to understand that more. I was going to ask you to put in the slides. We have slide number 4. If you can go to the link in the chat and put it there, or you can add in the chat box. Just a few words about your priority, your prioritized goal. The goal can be many things, right? We want to understand if your goal is to strengthen your activism or your movement, it's empower your movement building, or is it to maybe increase more awareness, public campaign, or is it for specific advocacy? And I want to focus more on specific advocacy targets. Okay. So I just want to highlight, based on your research goal, right? And that can be your campaign goal, advocacy goal, whatever goal you are reaching. It's important to identify what or who are you targeting, right? Specific person or group with some power that would meet what you want to do. And that will guide you how you want to go after them. The target we are talking today is who or what, right? It can be individual, it can be institutions, group, organizations with, they can influence your goal, right? Their action is so important. They have some kind of power and their action is influential to your goal. And ask yourself if what you plan to do, right, would pressure them. What are the tactics and ways that you might pressure or motivate, encourage. You can choose your spectrum. And there can be several targets, depends on how you want to achieve it, right? But each target, you will need a different ways to reach them. And when you talk about target, I want you to be more specific. Don't say government, that's like a large organization. What within the government, right? Which department? If you can identify individual or specific position who sit within the department, that even better. So you can understand them more and better define your tactics. So in the few minutes, I'll ask you to identify a few targets, but think about that. Who you want them to listen to you, and what you want them to do in order for you to meet your goal, right? And to reach to them, you will need different tactics, and you will have to figure out what would work best. Just something about, and this is pretty much based on Beautiful Trouble, a great resource and tool for activists. Now that you understand your target, right? When you understand your target, you think about, this is how I reach them. I will communicate with them. I'll convince them. I will pressure them. But how are you doing that? Think about a kind of actions and tactics that maybe you know well within your experience, but outside their experience, they're not expecting. It can be something surprising them that will grab their attention and shake their power a little bit. This is quite abstract. But can we go to the next part, Francesca? But to reach your goal, it's maybe hard. If you're targeting prime minister or CEO of a company, you may not have direct access to them, right? Or it's maybe too sensitive politically to reach them. You can think about the other, what is called secondary target. It's a steps, one step before you reach your priority target, right? Think about those, because there may be a few people you need to reach first, and they can help bring your message, bring what you want to their attention. I'll give you an example. I work with a fishery community, and they wanted to target the Minister of Fishery, who have a decision-making power and influence whether the infrastructure project will go ahead or not. This community have no access to this minister, right? They don't know a phone number where they live, like no ways to communicate. They found out that their religious leader in the city they live in is powerful, and the minister are politicians, so they care about their voters, right? Elections coming up. So this community reach out to this religious leader and share their concern. It's a huge number of people who share this concern, and they share the research finding with this religious leader and got his attention. So he received those and wrote a letter, an open letter to the minister. And once the letter from this religious leader, it's coming from, you could say, constituencies that have some political power, and it reached the Minister of Fishery that this community want to reach. So you see now that, you know, they have identified who they want to reach, but to get there, it might be one or two steps. I'll now pass it to Indira for the next part. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Tom.
Thanks, Tom. Gracias, Tom. ¿Pueden escucharme? Voy a prender la cámara y me dicen, espero que puedan verme bien. Lo que les voy a compartir ahorita va a ser pues muy rápidamente un modelo que hemos trabajado junto con las compañeras de la Sandía Digital. Mi nombre es Indira Cornelio, yo soy parte de la organización Witness, y junto con la Sandía Digital, después de del trabajo que hemos hecho con movimientos que están en defensa de la tierra, de los territorios, hemos trabajado en plasmar esta metodología que les voy a compartir. Está toda en español y hemos logrado traducir únicamente este mapa al inglés, pero bueno, igual estamos por acá para poder como apoyarles y dar seguimiento, ya que el tema o el tiempo que tenemos ahora para este tema es muy corto. Nosotras lo que hemos estado trabajando es una manera en la que podemos ver la comunicación estratégica inspirada en la luna, inspirada en la siembra, en otros, pues en los procesos que los movimientos con quienes trabajamos, pues tienen o llevan a cabo durante todo el año, ¿no? ¿Cómo podemos ver o retomar, digamos, de esos procesos que ya se realizan, en este caso, en los grupos con los que trabajamos, y de ahí inspirarnos para el digamos, no sé, ¿se escucha bien? Creo voy a apagar el video para que, por acá me sale un mensaje. Lo que nosotras hemos estado trabajando es en poder ver cuatro etapas que la primera es, a lo mejor acá está muy pequeño, pero la primera es la planeación, la producción, la segunda, la implementación y la evaluación. Y también hacer un espacio para, dentro de nuestros planes de comunicación, incluir la escucha. A lo mejor suena muy simple, pero lo que hemos visto en el trabajo es que usualmente nos vamos directo a hacer la acción. Nos vamos directo a lo que ya sabemos hacer, a las tácticas o a los tipos de acciones de comunicación que estamos más acostumbrados a realizar. Entonces, lo que buscamos con este recorrido de pasos es que podamos ir como deteniéndonos en cuestiones que son realmente muy importantes, como nos compartía ya también Tom, para que esa acción que vamos a hacer en verdad llegue a las personas que llegamos y en verdad genere un impacto, puesto que en la mayoría de los casos los recursos con los que contamos son pues pocos, o el tiempo que tenemos puede llegar a ser poco también. Y bueno, igual de los pilares, si podemos pasar a la siguiente, de los pilares que queremos incluir o asegurarnos de incluir en este esquema, en esta metodología, si podemos ir a al siguiente slide, por favor, es asegurarnos de que la comunicación que se está haciendo de la mano con el movimiento del que formamos parte, asegurarnos de que la escucha y la seguridad van ligadas, van dentro de nuestras acciones de comunicación. Esto, puesto que los intereses, como escucho y leí un poco también en el ejercicio que mandaron, en los documentos que mandaron, los intereses que se podrían ver afectados, a los que queremos, digamos, que se vean afectados, son personas que tienen, por ejemplo, en el caso de México, que pueden estar ligadas al narcotráfico, ¿no? Que las acciones que pueden llevar a cabo en respuesta a lo que hagamos, pues pueden ser variadas, pueden ser, sí, pues para dejarlo ahí, ¿no? Variadas. Entonces es muy importante que podamos incluir dentro de nuestras acciones de comunicación ese pensamiento de la seguridad y que un poco pongamos en pausa ciertas como acciones que luego se dicen en torno a cómo se debe atender la seguridad, y que más bien construyamos una base que nos permita informar las acciones de comunicación en el caso específico del contexto en el que estamos. Ahorita vamos a platicar de eso, si podemos pasar a la siguiente. Uno de los elementos que nos parece clave en este en este trabajo de comunicación estratégica es la escucha, es ese instinto, es esa apertura que podamos tener todas las personas que vamos a estar trabajando en difundir estos resultados, en poder escuchar tanto, por ejemplo, qué efecto están generando nuestras acciones de comunicación, pero también cómo se está moviendo en lo más fino el actor al que queremos dirigir, por ejemplo, nuestras acciones, o el actor que se verá a lo mejor al que queremos como dirigir esa acción política, digamos, ¿no? Si es a lo mejor una empresa minera, por ejemplo, si es a lo mejor el Estado, que tengamos esa apertura de identificar movimientos en lo más sutil que va habiendo en ese, digamos, ecosistema. Eso nos parece muy importante para que nuestra comunicación pueda ser mucho más estratégica. Si vamos a la siguiente, por favor. En este momento de las 4 fases que yo les mencionaba, estamos hablando apenas de la primera, ¿no? Estamos en la fase de la planeación. Para nosotras es muy importante que, como les decía, antes siquiera de empezar a hablar de comunicación o del trabajo ya específico de diseñar una acción de comunicación, es muy importante que tengamos una base junto con las personas de la organización, junto con las personas del movimiento, con aliados también puede construirse, que hagamos un análisis de la realidad, que podamos detenernos antes de poder pensar en videos, imágenes, lo que queramos o lo que estemos ya por acá imaginándonos, que podamos partir de un análisis de la realidad, que podamos partir de decir, bueno, cómo se está moviendo todo hasta ahora. El actor, cómo se está configurando sus redes, por ejemplo, cómo se están configurando las nuestras. Que podamos partir de eso. El segundo paso es que podamos ligar esas acciones de comunicación, ligarlas pues a todo el trabajo, asegurarnos que vayan junto con la visión del movimiento en el que estamos trabajando, que vaya todo bien enraizado en el movimiento, en las organizaciones, para ahora sí ya poder pasar a definir el objetivo de comunicación. Definir el objetivo de comunicación, qué es lo que se quiere lograr en específico. A lo mejor ustedes ahorita están en un punto en el que terminaron sus investigaciones, terminaron su recolección de datos y vieron o tienen material como para trabajar 5 campañas distintas, tienen muchos mensajes, tienen como si fuera la masa enfrente y eso puede tomar muchas formas. Es muy importante entonces que tengamos la claridad de por dónde necesitamos empezar, cuál es el objetivo de comunicación, quiénes son las personas, ¿no? Las audiencias, y que empecemos ya a hilar más bien en lo fino. Eso es muy importante porque el cambio, pues como sabemos, toma tiempo, ¿no? Entonces, es importante que vayamos, que con esta información que vayamos asentando, que vayamos como definiendo con nuestro grupo de trabajo, nos va a permitir priorizar, porque la masa o el material y el cambio que se necesita es mucho. Entonces, ver por dónde vamos a empezar. Después del objetivo de comunicación, las audiencias, como también decía Tom, es importante que no digamos el Estado, ¿no? Sino que digamos qué persona en específico, la minera, esa minera, ¿no? O sea, cuáles son los actores que están también apoyando a esa minera. Que digamos a lo mejor la sociedad en general, bueno, no, cuál es el grupo en específico que nos puede apoyar en ese cambio que queremos lograr, quiénes son, dónde están. Eso nos va a ayudar muchísimo. Y por último, que podamos identificar o hablar también de las narrativas. ¿Qué se está diciendo en torno a ese tema en específico? ¿Quién lo está diciendo? ¿Y qué efecto está logrando? Si podemos pasar a la siguiente, por favor. En el primer punto que les contaba del análisis de la realidad, ¿cómo hacemos ese análisis de la realidad? ¿Cómo sabemos en dónde es que estamos paradas, en dónde estamos parados? Para eso nos puede ayudar, por ejemplo, hacer una línea del tiempo. Parar y decir, bueno, ¿cuál es la historia de este conflicto, digamos? ¿Cuál es la historia de esta situación en los últimos años? Que podamos analizar qué ha sucedido, hacer ese recuento. Esto es lo que nos va a ayudar a trabajar en torno a la seguridad. La cuestión de la seguridad es que cada quien puede tener ciertos fragmentos de información dentro de un mismo movimiento. Muchas veces hay amenazas o hay situaciones que han sucedido, que le han pasado a personas y a lo mejor no las han podido comunicar. Entonces es importante que para el análisis de la realidad vayamos construyendo ese piso común. Y una manera de empezar a hacerlo para asegurarnos de que como que estemos con los piecitos en la tierra al trabajar eso, es tener una línea del tiempo. Y el otro ejercicio que nos puede ayudar, si nos vamos a la siguiente, es hacer un mapa de actores. Y aquí, para compartirles, de repente cuando hablamos en torno a la seguridad, hay cosas que hemos escuchado. A veces dicen, si algo sucede, llamamos a la prensa. Bueno, pero ¿cuáles son los contactos? ¿Qué prensa sí nos va a contestar? Es importante que este mapa de actores lo hagamos, nos tomemos el tiempo de realizarlo para ayudar. Muchos de estos ejercicios incluso ya los tienen, ya los hablamos a lo mejor en nuestros movimientos, pero no los hemos plasmado o se hicieron en algún momento y no se han actualizado. Es importante entonces que nos tomemos este tiempo antes de pasar a la cuestión de comunicación incluso para ver en qué escenario vamos a trabajar. Y así como vamos a hacer un mapa de actores, este es un ejemplo de una minera en México, en Guerrero. Así como vamos a mapear los actores en contra, digamos, hacer el ejercicio también de mapear quiénes son las personas o las organizaciones aliadas también, con qué recursos contamos también en nuestro movimiento. Aquí estamos apenas trabajando en los primeros pasos de la planeación de nuestra comunicación estratégica. Apenas estamos diciendo, ok, este es el lugar o este es el escenario en el que vamos a trabajar. Y asegurándonos de que todas las personas estamos en la misma sintonía. Si pasamos a la siguiente, como les comentaba, la idea de este ciclo, la guía completa sí está en español, la pueden checar y hay una parte muy breve en inglés. Una de las cosas que quisimos priorizar es el poder incluir la seguridad como uno de los ejes en el trabajo de la comunicación estratégica. Entonces, para enseñarles también en qué puntos vamos a identificar eso, es desde que estamos en la práctica, por ejemplo, haciendo entrevistas, es importante que vayamos hablando y que tengamos prácticas de consentimiento informado, que vayamos diciéndole a las personas por qué vamos a realizar esa entrevista, si están de acuerdo, y que nos aseguremos nosotros, quienes estamos trabajando en la comunicación, de que ese consentimiento es algo que puede cambiar. Esa persona pudo estar de acuerdo en ese momento de salir en un video, por ejemplo, pero si algo se reconfigura en su realidad, puede revocar ese consentimiento. Y analizar también no sé si en donde están ustedes sea común, pero en México lo es, que de repente hay movimientos que retoman algunas acciones de seguridad que le funcionaron a otras personas y las quieren implementar. Se escucha, por ejemplo, si hay riesgo, hay que aumentar la visibilidad. Y eso es muy peligroso que sin tener este trabajo que les he mencionado, queramos tomar, apropiarnos de algo que le funcionó a otro movimiento en otra realidad. Entonces, aquí pues la recomendación es que podamos empezar un trabajo en torno a la seguridad que acompañe e informe nuestro hacer en la comunicación. Les pongo unos ejemplos como una bitácora de incidentes, elaborar un plan o elaborar protocolos de seguridad. Todo eso, hay organizaciones que se dedican o tienen materiales a eso y de igual manera nosotras podemos como compartirles esos enlaces. Por ahí voy a poner mi correo en el chat, pero que sea algo que vayamos metiendo como en el ADN de nuestra comunicación. Y si nos vamos a la siguiente, una vez que ya tengamos como los materiales, por acá les compartía también otros, como en este bloque de seguridad, les compartía también algunas preguntas que nos pueden ayudar también antes de compartir, como en esta idea de que nos acompaña la seguridad en todo el camino. Ya que estemos en ese punto, pues el recordar que debemos preguntarnos de nuevo si ese video podría ponernos en riesgo o ese material ponernos en riesgo a nosotras, nosotros, a alguna de las personas que aparece, si incluye algunas imágenes o contenido que pueda ir en contra de la privacidad, de la dignidad de las personas, como otras preguntas más ligadas a la seguridad. Y en la siguiente, también para darles unos ejemplos, el hecho de que incluyamos la seguridad no significa, por ejemplo, si podemos ir a la siguiente slide, no significa que el material no vaya a salir, no significa que la entrevista no la podamos compartir, solo significa que vamos a tener como unas preguntas guías o guías para acompañarnos en la toma de decisión para ver de qué manera debemos hacerlo, con qué cuidados debemos hacerlo. Les comparto aquí, les comparto unos ejemplos de algunas campañas que ya lo han hecho. En el caso de las primeras, es una campaña que se hizo por los desalojos que empezaron a haber en la Ciudad de México cuando empezó el COVID. Y lo que hicieron fue que los testimonios fueron leídos por actores y actrices para que las personas no aparecieran en cámara. Se hicieron ilustraciones como los gatitos que pueden ver y fueron actores y actrices quienes pudieron difundir esas historias. También para como cuidar el tema de la privacidad, pero también para amplificar la voz en esos testimonios. Y los otros ejemplos de abajo son ejemplos de una organización que se llama Documenta, que trabaja con personas privadas de libertad, que denuncian, por ejemplo, pues lo que vivían en penales y también cómo el narcotráfico les ha perseguido, ¿no? al querer salir de ciertos espacios. Entonces, para la cuestión de seguridad, compartirles también esos ejemplos, ¿no? Que hay una diversidad de maneras también. Y bueno, retomando, para esta última partecita, nos quedan como unos 5 minutitos todavía. Perdón si voy muy rápido. El compartir también una idea en cuanto a los diferentes momentos o dinámicas en los que vamos a hacer la comunicación. Durante un análisis que hicimos hace un par de años, veíamos que mucho del trabajo que hacen los movimientos se hace desde esta idea de la respuesta.
From this idea of response, we call it firefighters communication.
La minera llegó y se instaló, hay que responder. La frontera del petróleo, hay que responder. ¿Cómo estas?
There was a mining project and we had to respond to them, to these extractivist projects. They drag us into a logic and we are subject to the time lapse they impose. So these companies or the state are forcing us to act in response only. There may be other situations, which is the different situations, which are these political moments or when we can also respond, and it gives us more margin to act. But based on our experience with movement here in Mexico, the logic in which we're acting is usually as response or other moments that we can. What moments are we really looking to communicate with our own dynamics? What are the moments we are saying, okay, sometimes we'll respond to urgency, but also try to identify what is going on in our territories, because often the state or all this structure takes these silences or spaces to define us, the movement, and to say things like, really those spaces where money was, there was nothing there. I need to skip a bit, but I would like to explain this a bit more. If we can move to slide number 23. What we're talking here, yeah, 23. Let's skip to that one. Right now, we are talking about narratives. Every message that you have, every video or interview, every message you are throwing out is done embedded in a structure. Narratives are these thinking structures that are telling us stories or telling us about the different stakeholders, and we're missing things like a politician talking about a very clear narrative, declaring mining as development, and therefore whoever opposes that development or whoever opposes mining is opposing development. That's one of the things we would like to share with this guide, with these resources. It's to understand. In order to give messages, we have to start with an analysis of narratives, because there already is a conversation going on. So in the next slide, I will share an example. If you can please, yeah. There will be some examples here of narratives that we call hegemonic narratives, which is certain actors are already saying, some stakeholders are throwing those waves, as we could call it. And it's very important for us to listen to these stakeholders, so we have a whole map and see where we're going to put our narrative. If we don't take this into account, is as we have people speaking in a different language, it is important to understand what is being talked about, because this narrative is going to be heard on TV, on radio, and maybe our work should start there to counter this narrative and prove it wrong. Maybe if you can look at this chart with more calm, I will share with my presentation. If we could go back to slide number 20 to just close.
tenemos nuestro objetivo de comunicación, si ya
if we have our communication objective clear with all the information we have right now, what is the starting point with our target audience? It is key for us to imagine how to start a conversation sitting around a table with our audience. This is a document called Visualizing Information for Advocacy. I think it's very useful material because it helps us reach our audience so they understand that these issues exist. Maybe they do know about the existence, but they may need to listen to arguments. This chart is in Spanish in slide 21, if you want to take a look. And we should identify in what point of a conversation we find our audience. What information do they already have? And we should take it a step at a time to disseminate what we found in the investigation. And if we move to slide 22, each of us right here has had a path in to arrive to the place where we are, maybe through family, or we lived a situation in firsthand ourselves. But to remind us that we have also changed ideas around different issues. Maybe not the one you're fighting right now, but yourselves, ourselves, have had a path in terms of changing views or positions or engagement. And exactly that way, when we think of our audience, we need to consider also that it may be as important, and we see that a lot with movements, which the ones we work, to do this exercise also, because many times these extractivist projects or governments do a lot of work to break our work, maybe, or so it's also important to work towards the inside. I would leave it here. I hope this hasn't been too fast. I tend to speak very fast, but I will leave you my email in any case. So if there's anything we could help you, we are here. So thank you very much. Thank you very much, Indira. I'm sorry, it all had to be faster than we planned, but I hope this was useful. I think some of the messages, like this of the hegemonic narrative or the counter-hegemonic narrative, is important for our specific audiences or goals. I think they're very important issues. We are recording this presentation, so we are going to share it with others later on, and how Indira very generously has offered herself to be available for any individual communication if anybody needs it. If you want to talk deeper or more in detail about your communication plans. I think Indira has to go now, but thank you. So thank you to be with us in this workshop. Thank you. And if there are any questions to her, as I said, You can write them in the chat, or we can write to us to our email, and we'll get you in touch with Indira directly. And because we're a bit short of time, thank you, Indira. We're going to continue talking of communication a bit more. We have our colleague Esther with us. Maybe some of you already know her. She's from the Secretariat of the ESCR network. And Esther, we thank you very much for being here. And she's going to talk about some communication products, development of communication material that can be used for our audiences. So without much further ado, I will give you the floor. I will put up your presentation again.
Hola, muchas gracias, Ceci. Muchas gracias a todas y a todos y a las presentaciones. La verdad que personalmente he aprendido mucho.
I have learned a lot with the presentation from Tom and the presentation of Indira. It is a pleasure. Chespi, one question. I have like 15 minutes, right? Thank you. Like we have already talked about audiences, we have talked about how to elaborate a communication plan. What I wanted to do is to give examples of strategies to reach out to different types of audiences, because even though we have one main goal, it is very important to define what our different types of audiences are. Can you please pass to the next slide? I am going to do a brief summary of, but when we are developing a communication plan, what we have to keep in mind is that no one knows your story better than you do. The problem is that not all audiences will understand the story if you don't adapt the message to them. We can have one same message, but each audience is going to interpret it differently. It's not going to understand the message the same way an actor, a representative from the government, of the local government, than a person in a community who is being affected by a specific mining project. So we have to adapt the messages. And another simple and basic recommendation is to be realistic and prioritize the audiences we can realistically reach, because we are not going to the general public. We need to think more specifically. Our audience is better to think about like a specific group of women in a specific region that works in a specific sector. This make it easier to reach out to them. We can go to the next slide, please. Before we go to examples, we know already that in the plan, the communication, we have goals and then steps. Then we have the audiences and the tactics and tools to reach them, because each audience can be in a different place, because some audiences are easier to reach through a newspaper because we know they read, or because we know that they listen to a specific program on the radio. Some are easier to reach by organizing an event, or maybe an ally is organizing this event, and this is where we can find this audience. Today also, there are some audiences that are in the virtual space that are interacting in social networks, but in some communities, there are spaces where Facebook works better. Some prefer Twitter, like representatives in politics, they use Twitter a lot. And and the community, they still use Facebook more. So we need to do a little bit of research to know where these audiences are that we want to reach out to, both realistic in like the real world and the virtual world. Once we know, when we have these audience mappings defined, like we have a list of media contacts, we know what outlets they work with, then we get to the point of messages. And it is very important what Indira said about this small explanation about what we want to do. We want to expose, explain, or explore, and depending on that, we have different types of projects. But the message in the end that we want to communicate is to think what our audiences need, what we, what we want them to think, believe, and do. We want them to think about a specific subject that is necessary. We want them to believe that this issue is important for the community. And normally it is also important to this action, if we want to involve them, if we want to give them more information, it is to think, believe, and do. And finally, the timeline. And this, the many times, like Indira says, we work with this urgency to do things, but the timeline, we define it. And it doesn't have to be marked by economic power or by a specific day that is decided. No, we do that. We decide the timeline. And in this timeline, it is important to know if there are key moments where we can communicate our products, where we can organize an event. And this timeline, it, we decide on that depending on our resources and the strategic moments that we decide on. And then to measure the success, we need some references, some indicators to see if we accomplish our goals. Like if we have an event where we want 20 people to assist, because we have to then measure that, because this will help us to do follow up on our goals. If we want to work with media, for example, we need to define very measurable goals. We accomplish, for example, that two community leaders participate in a radio show. We need to try to measure our success. And we go to the next slide, and we're going to start with some examples. Here we see, depending on the type of products, we have a report, some have videos, and visual maps. Maybe sometimes you want to make a website, it doesn't matter. But in the majority of cases, these products, in most cases, we will have to adapt this product for each audience. And the medium we choose to reach them will will also determine how we should adapt the output, because it's not the same to have an event that is in person than when we are where we will have posters, or like create a type of product that if we are working on social media, because that will condition our types of messages. So we have to ask ourselves where our audience is and in what media they work, because it will determine what type of product we will use. If we can go to the next slide, please. Examples. Here what I wanted to show you are specific examples where ESCR-Net have been working on, and products that we had to distribute that are part of a wider strategy of advocacy between the members of the network. One example of one product turns into different types of products with the same message to reach different audiences that have been identified as strategic. For example, this is a recently published collective position about data for economic, social, and cultural rights of Francesca's working group. It was a big report of 150 pages with a lot of content that we needed to communicate to a specific audience. In the first phase, we identified that are members of the network and allies, and also a section of groups of human rights defenders that could be interested in data collection and analysis. Can we go to the next one? Here so you can see this example, like with this goal of disseminate the collective position among members in this point of the timeline, like to start exposing the idea, we have a main output, a product, and this is where we started to adapt it. We adapted it, we designed the collective position, which is, this is the report. We have done it like to make it more attractive. We have an article on the website with a summary about the positions. So you have an easy access to it. And then we do an event of promotion. And since it was online, the promotion would be through social media. We made a flyer, like if you can do click on a promotion of an event on own media. I don't know if that will work, Francesca. Yeah, we can see that. This one is in English. We also had it in Spanish, but like each product, we try to do something to use our main message so that the communities count to communicate certain messages or to support products like the collective position, because after that, we go to the slide, to the main presentation. Yeah, there we go. The collective position is very long, and this will happen to you too. You will have like lots of results from the research. Some are easier to explain than others. For an audience that doesn't understand so well, that won't be able to analyze all this information, is not so like we create an explainer for social media, and we can also do this on in print. For example, these are like, instead of a position of 100 pages, we developed these graphics that are very simple, that summarize the information from that whole document. This type of example for social network, we can also do it. We can also print it if we have an event where we want to explain what the results were from that research, for example. We can go to the next slide. I'm going to show you a different example, like the comic on corporate capture. We have a comic where we explain what the phenomenon of corporate capture is, and that could also support our advocacy work in different spaces to fight against this wrong influence of companies. In advocacy strategy that is very wide, we decided that as a good product for communication, we could make a comic, because it would be a way to bring to people, like very visually and educationally, something that is very complex to explain. So if we go to the next slide, our main goals, our output was a background document, also very complex with study cases that would show examples of corporate captures in spaces like the UN that we developed and supported with a lot of information that we can use with certain audiences that can read this, like in organizations that work these issues, but these same messages were translated in a different format that was more open and more accessible without losing what we want to say, but differently. This would be the comic. You have the links here, so you can read them whenever. I think you've already seen it. The adaptations of this comic, we did a video telling what the comic was to reach more people. And we also distributed it through our channels in social networks. So people could see the video and the comic. And we had members explaining what corporate capture was, why it is important to take action against this phenomenon. But we also wanted to distribute this comic between a wider audience. That's why we did a media strategy and we created a press release. If you want, you can see how we organized it. We did a public event and we had also other strategies, like in our emails, we created a signature with the image of the comic. So whoever would get an email from us would see it. We changed our our photos from Twitter. These small strategies can also support us from with the same message, adapt the message to different audiences with one same goal. And I think I'm going to stop here. These are some of tools that can support this work that we can use, like free editing and publishing tools like Canva, Adobe Spark. We use Canva, but Adobe Spark is also good and they are completely for free. So we can do many things with them. And these are some also Meta is to publish on Instagram and Facebook. It is very easy to use, and click to tweet, which is also a tool that is very useful when you want somebody to support you in Twitter. You just have to write a tweet. This creates a link that you can share with people, and then just by doing click, we'll open the Twitter and we'll have the tweet already written. It's very quick, and this is a very quick way to in case they want to send it to like a political representative. That's an idea, and you can also complement them.
But as we are planning to communicate these findings in such a wide, with such a wide reach, we really need to be careful about the content, about the accuracy, about the validity of what we are saying, because it's very important to not undermine the impact of the communication. So the last bit of today's session will be led by Irene Chinotti from Pamoja, and she will talk about how to strengthen the credibility and legitimacy of research findings, which again we know you will get a lot of backlash, especially from the people you are trying to target, from those who are in power. So it's important to think about how do we stand our ground, how do we make sure that what we are saying is correct and has credibility, has weight. And yes, I'll leave it to Irene now. Just tell me when you want me to change slide, Irene, and I think you can get started. Thank you.
Thank you, Francesca. I'll take the shortest time possible because I think I'm using the resources that I'll be using are mainly from what we did pull out at the beginning of this session or the beginning of this project. And maybe the main thing that we want to insist on as we talk about the credibility of our research findings is remembering how sensitive some of these projects that we are conducting, some of these research projects we are conducting are. I hope I'm not too fast, the interpreter. Am I okay? Okay, thank you. So, from the onset, we want to move away from the thoughts that the end justifies the means, because the whole process really matters. How we did everything from the onset, setting our research questions to how we plan to deliver the final output is a very important concept. And so what it comes to is the fact that the whole process needs to be conducted in a careful manner and a very thorough manner, which is done in an honest way, and so that we can have enough outputs or enough aspects that can support the kind of outputs that we present. Francesca, the next slide. And when we talk about what a credible research finding is, we have to understand that it can be subjective, but the main aspect that we need to know is that the objectivity bit of it has to come out strongly. And it still takes us back to the kind of projects that we are currently running. You know that right now, as we plan to, I've heard from majority of the groups, or the group that has presented, that they are coming to the end of their process. And so we'll find a lot of issues to do with delegitimization of our data based on how sensitive some of the outputs will be presented are. And so we need to provide accurate data as much as possible, and where we have and where we need to provide evidence and supportive information to give a backstop to whatever we are presenting, we need to do that very seamlessly and have our data at the tip of our hands. Next slide, Francesca, please. And so maybe we could just look at very few components that we can consider, or we could consider as we think about how credible our findings are this far. And one of the aspects is the question about maintaining the objectivity of our research findings. And obviously, as human beings, we'll have our biasness based on our experiences and the kind of work that we deal with, or the kind of things that are brought before us. But at the end of it all, we need to understand that we have to avoid having skepticism and biasness. And our findings should always have evidence to corroborate whatever we are presenting. And this takes me back to maybe a process that we normally conduct as Pamoja Trust. And you'll find that we have some of our projects relating to issues to do with development. And as we look through issues that are of need to a specific community, we tend to try as much as we can to use formulas or processes to come up with the final outputs. For example, if we want to assess the issues within a certain communities, we would utilize tools such as pairwise matrix, so that as we present and say that maybe the issue of water is the main concern for a certain community, we try to show how the communities thought through the process of prioritizing the water issue. And I think I'll share with the group some of these tools that we also use to support our our process and to ensure that whatever we present to the different stakeholders shows that it was carefully thought, even as we say that it was community-centered. The other aspect is using the multiple sources of data. I know that most of our projects rely on testimonies that we get from the people that we are working with and the communities that we are doing these projects together. However, relying a lot on the government documents and the government sources is very important. And I was looking through some of the documents that Francesca shared with us, and I could see that there was citing of this kind of data, which is commendable. And I think it's important that even as we move towards the end of our project, we ensure that these sources of data are well spelled out, well put together, so that as we present the findings to the target actors, we ensure that these sources are also mentioned and clearly mentioned specific bits and which lines, which sections. All this information is well packaged. Next slide, Francesca. Aside from that, as I started saying, okay, I'll go a little bit slower. So as I had started by saying that this entire projects are not supposed to just focus on the end, but then we need to look at the means in which we get to the outputs that we desire. And that's why it's important to always keep it on the record. Whatever information you gather, whatever methodology you follow, please put it on the record. And most of the times, it's normally advised to use an Excel sheet where you write maybe the processes that were followed, that is the methodologies, put together the sources of information in the columns. If you have photos, put them together in that Excel sheet just to ensure that there is consistency in how you maintain your records, and you put them together for access to anyone at any given time whenever we are asked. Another thing is on building alliances and involving different partners. And on this bit, apart from involving the partners that we work with, for example, the ESCR-Net and other actors that you're collaborating with, even the people that you're targeting, it's also important for them to be involved. That is maybe the government, or talk about the corporate that you're going to be involving. At some point, you need to tell them from the word go, whatever you're doing, whether they agree with it or not, so that from the onset, they know that this research is being conducted, and to ensure that they can also get to learn from their process. And I think from this, I'm also learning a lot from what we are doing as an organization. We have a project where we are trying to look at the impacts of how the road infrastructure is affecting individuals' rights to habitat and rights to access different livelihoods. And initially, when we were starting the project, we hadn't involved a lot of the stakeholders that are key in this sector. But with time, we've noticed that we needed to engage the road agencies. And so we brought them back. And as we are looking at the impacts of these projects, we've noticed that themselves are able to identify the challenges within their projects and learn from the projects as well. So from that specific experience, we've learned that aside from engaging the civil society organizations, the NGOs, and also the government actors in the specific issue of our concern, even the people that we are trying to tell we have a certain problems, the people who are supposed to be the consumers of our outputs need to be involved during this process for them to learn from the process and also own their mistakes. The other thing is also ensuring that there is consent and confidentiality in the entire process as you gather the information, because you don't want to produce an output where we say that a certain community said this, and then we find that the community in one way or the other differs with what you're saying. So always ensure that there is consent and confidentiality so that the people you're working with can own the process and can actually say that this is what we did say and this is what we want to be done. Because the moment the consent and confidentiality is violated, there will be distrust amongst the people we are working with, and already we're in the eyes of the people whom we want to target as the key people who are supposed to consume the output will already have a shaky kind of relation, and they'll already start doubting the kind of content or the kind of output that we are presenting to them. So confidentiality with the people that we are working with, that is the communities, has to be there, and it's an uncompromisable aspect. The last thing is ensuring that you're specific and precise. Where you gathered information from interviews, let it be specific, and that this information was gathered through probably focus group discussions, or this information was gathered through certain literature reviews, so that at the end of it all, the bottom line still remains that you can always back up whatever you present to the different stakeholders. And I think if we follow this, at the end of our entire process, you'll find a lot of credibility or acceptance in whatever we present to the different duty bearers. And so as I conclude, the next slide, Francesca, what would we say? Next slide. Thank you. What would we say are the common issues that weaken the credibility of our research? The first one is making the factual errors in our analysis. Where we have facts, use the facts and present them as they are. Do not try to misquote them. And where you have any issues to get in any issues about the facts that have been presented, point it out clearly that this fact was written in a certain document, and we do not agree with it because of this and this and this and these facts. The other thing is exaggerating the impacts of a problem or the number of people affected. It's better to not mention a certain issue if we are not certain about the numbers. We can use general numbers. Using general numbers would be much more better than using specific numbers if we do not know how many people are affected or the extent of the impact of our problem. Finally, people most of the times use findings from FGDs to make it a generalized statement about an entire community. And this is a wrong assumption, because a focus group discussions, remember, it also comes with the aspect of perception and different individuals sharing their experiences. So this information is credible. This information you've gathered from the focus group discussion is credible, but you need to point out clearly that this information was gathered from FGDs, and it's not particularly from any specific, maybe written source or something that could be used to generalize the opinion of an entire community. The other thing is breaking community commitments with testimonies and key informants, just as I mentioned earlier on. Respecting anonymity and respecting confidentiality goes a long way in people owning the kind of outputs that you produce finally. So always let's keep it in mind that testimonies and commitments that we made with the key informants need to be kept private if they were meant to be kept anonymous, and if they were meant, and if you have to release them to the public, let it be with their consent. Finally, is the aspect on people most times make conclusions that are not fully supported by evidence. And we are saying that as much as possible, always ensure that whatever you're presenting is supported by evidence, may it be pictorial evidence, video evidence, or even the statements that have been directly quoted from people. That could be good evidence, but not present something that you're not certain you can support when it goes in front of the key stakeholders that you're targeting. Thank you. I think that would be all from me.
Thank you, Irene. Thank you, and sorry again for rushing it through this very important issue. Thank you.